Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The room fell silent long before anyone heard the impact. Admiral Rourke's shadow stretched across the polished steel floor as he stepped closer to her. Commander Lyra Kalis, the one officer in the entire Northern Fleet who refused to bow. The air inside the briefing chamber felt heavy, as if even the walls sensed what was coming. Rourke's jaw twitched, rage swelling behind cold eyes. He whispered something no one caught, then his fist exploded forward. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Lyra's head snapped sideways, her lips splitting, blood forming a thin red thread down her chin. Every officer froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Rourke stood over her, chest heaving, daring her to break. Daring her to fold. For one heartbeat she stayed still. Then her fingers curled. Her breath steadied. And she rose. Slowly. Intentionally. The entire fleet knew she had been disrespected. But none of them were ready for what she'd do next. The first twist arrived the moment she straightened her spine. Lyra wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. She was done. The room watched in stunned silence as she lifted her head, her eyes burning, not with anger but something deeper. Something old. Something personal. Rourke smirked, assuming he'd won. His bodyguard stepped in, flanking him, broad shoulders squared, hands on their belts. But Lyra's voice cut through the room with a calmness so sharp it felt like a blade. "You should never have touched me." Rourke raised his hand again, ready to strike a second time, confident she'd crumble. Confident she'd accept it, like so many before her. But the moment his fingers twitched, the moment his elbow bent, everything inside Lyra snapped like a stretched cable pushed too far. Her body moved before her mind even fully realized it. And the room gasped. Her strike was clean. Loud. Final. Her knuckles crashed into Rourke's jaw with a force none of them could comprehend. It wasn't the punch of an ordinary officer. It was a punch loaded with years of swallowed humiliation, buried resentment, and battles she had survived alone. Rourke's head jerked violently to the side, his legs folding under him. His body hit the ground before his guards even processed what happened. They stared at her, stunned into paralysis, hands hovering at their belts but unable to draw. She stood over the fallen admiral, her chest rising and falling, her lips still bleeding. The room spun in disbelief. Officers who never dared blink in front of Rourke felt their throats close. This was rebellion. This was insanity. This was the moment a career, maybe a life, should have ended. And yet, for some reason none of them understood, Lyra didn't look afraid. She looked free. But freedom had a cost and Lyra knew it. As the alarm began flashing red across the chamber walls, she tasted blood on her tongue and knew this moment would echo far beyond the room. The guards snapped out of their shock and reached for her, but not before she noticed something. One detail that made her heart drop deeper than the fear of punishment. A figure stood at the far end of the room, half hidden, watching her through the glass observation window. A figure she hadn't seen in years. A figure whose presence made no sense at all. Her breath caught. Her pulse spiked. Here. Now. Before she could move, before she could confirm the impossible, the guards lunged. The chapter ends as her wrists are grabbed, yet her eyes stay locked on the shadowed face behind the glass. The past had come for her, right in the moment she broke the present. The observation window reflected more than the lights of the briefing chamber. It reflected a memory she had buried deep beneath discipline and steel. Commander Lyra Kalis' eyes locked on the figure, a man whose presence was impossible, yet undeniable. Galen Voss. The operative she had thought lost during the Black Sea covert, the one whose disappearance had shattered her trust in the intelligence corps. He didn't move, just watched, his face half hidden in shadow, as if measuring her every heartbeat. Lyra's hands trembled, not from fear but recognition. His gaze carried secrets and dangers, the kind that didn't forgive mistakes. She realized, in that instant, that her fight with Admiral Rourke was no longer just about the Navy. Something far larger was converging, a storm she hadn't seen coming. And she understood the truth. The Admiral's assault had been a trigger, a distraction from what was about to unfold. Lyra's mind flashed to the weeks leading up to this moment. Rourke had grown increasingly hostile, petty in his commands, scrutinizing every movement she made. The fleet whispered rumors of favoritism, promotions sold to the highest bidder, officers bending to political whims. Lyra, sharp, independent, and unafraid, had become a target. Rourke resented her audacity, her refusal to bow to authority he didn't earn. Her defiance wasn't just personal pride, it was survival. She had uncovered small but dangerous inconsistencies: missing orders, sabotaged missions, officers reporting false logs. Each discovery deepened her suspicion that something darker than career politics was in play, something that threatened not only her, but the integrity of the Northern Fleet itself. And now, with Kalen watching, the danger was no longer invisible. The tension in the fleet's command room was suffocating. Officers whispered, some horrified, others secretly exhilarated. Lyra had shattered the image of invincible authority in a single blow. But she had no time for triumph. Her pulse raced as she recalled the covert operations she and Kalen had once undertaken together. Missions that had taught her precision, patience, and the unforgiving nature of loyalty. Those lessons now guided her movements. She ducked, twisted, and slipped past the first pair of guards who had lunged instinctively. Each motion was controlled, silent, rehearsed, calculated chaos. Her eyes never left the window. Kalen's expression didn't change, but she saw the faint twitch in his jaw, a sign he recognized the stakes. The past and present had collided, and she was the pivot point. Lyra's heart sank with a cold certainty. Rourke's punch had been orchestrated. The Admiral's anger wasn't random, it was engineered, a spark meant to ignite chaos while the real threat advanced unnoticed. She realized that someone had used her defiance to mask something larger, and Kalen Voss, ghost of missions past, was both warning and witness. Her thoughts raced. If she didn't act, the consequences could ripple across continents. The realization sharpened her focus. Every officer in the room could become a pawn. Every second of hesitation was a risk. The chapter closes with Lyra gripping the edge of the command console, blood from her split lips staining her sleeve, eyes fixed on Kalen as a quiet internal vow forms. She would uncover the conspiracy, even if it meant walking through fire alone. Years before the punch, Lyra Kalis had learned that authority could be weaponized against the righteous. She remembered the academy dorms at Vera Naval Institute, the cold walls echoing with whispers of favoritism and betrayal. Officers who bent to tradition thrived. Those who questioned it were crushed. Lyra had grown up in the shadow of a father who had vanished in classified operations, leaving her with nothing but fragments of his letters and a sense of unfinished justice. Her mother had taught her resilience, patience, and the necessity of watching every smile for hidden teeth. At Vera she had learned to fight silently, study opponents like chessboards and never trust empty titles. That foundation made her audacious enough to challenge Rourke now, but it also carried a weight. Every act of defiance risked exposure, humiliation, or worse. Every risk carried consequences. And Lyra had never been the type to turn away from a fight that mattered. Her first assignment aboard the Northern Fleet had been deceptively quiet, escorting supply vessels through the volatile Kareth Ocean. But she quickly recognized patterns others missed: improperly logged communications, officers sidestepping orders, subtle sabotage. She documented everything meticulously, hiding the truth in plain sight. When Rourke arrived on the fleet, his reputation preceded him: a man who crushed dissent with fists and favors. Others bent immediately, afraid of losing positions, livelihoods, or pride. Lyra refused. She questioned, probed, and defied openly, earning scorn, whispers, and eventually his personal ire. Her colleagues began to isolate her subtly, colleagues she had once trusted. Every moment became a test: to speak, to act, or to survive. And she learned, early and sharply, that the most dangerous enemy often wore a uniform, smiled politely, and hid fists in plain sight. In those months before the infamous day, Lyra's isolation became both armor and weapon. She trained alone in the fleet's underdeck gym, running drills in silence, imagining confrontations not yet come. Each strike, each parry, each controlled breath prepared her for moments she didn't yet understand, but would recognize immediately. Her mind replayed scenarios of betrayal and violence like a chess master studying moves in advance. When Admiral Rourke belittled her publicly, a warning shot across the bow, she restrained herself. When he sabotaged her missions, she noted it silently. But inside, a fire burned. She would not be humiliated, she would not kneel, and she would not allow injustice to go unanswered. That fire had been smoldering for years, waiting for a spark, and Rourke's punch provided it. And the spark was magnified the instant she saw Kalen Voss again. He had been a ghost in her past, someone who understood her like no one else, someone whose survival instincts matched her own. His sudden reappearance made the old memories sharper: the clandestine missions in the Arctic, the silent rescues under enemy fire, the betrayals that had fractured her trust. Lyra realized then that Rourke's attack was more than personal, It was a chess move in a much larger, dangerous game. She clenched her fists, tasted the iron of her own blood, and vowed internally, she would not just survive. She would uncover, confront, and dismantle the threat that had orchestrated this chaos. The room around her, the guards, the officers, even the fallen admiral, was now part of the battlefield, but the true war had only just begun. The Northern Fleet's command chamber was quiet again, but silence had grown dangerous. Officers shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check instruments while whispering speculation. Lyra could sense it, the tension like a live wire in the air. Admiral Rourke was still unconscious on the floor, groaning softly, but it wasn't him she feared. It was the invisible currents pulling at the fleet. Lies, secrets, and betrayals stitched into every chain of command. She had learned that authority often protected the guilty, and chaos was the shield. One misstep here and she wouldn't just be fighting Rourke's bodyguards, she'd be battling an entire system designed to suppress her. Every officer who avoided her gaze, every hand hovering near a concealed weapon, was a potential threat. She had to act, but not recklessly. Precision, patience, and control had saved her before. They would save her now. Her mind traced the threads of suspicion she had gathered over months. Captain Vaylor, the logistics officer with a disarming smile, had been misreporting supply runs. Lieutenant Kresh had altered mission logs under subtle pressure from Rourke. Even the fleet's communications director, a man trusted by most, had hidden evidence of intercepted intelligence. Lyra realized that the punch was merely a distraction, drawing attention away from the real conspiracy. Someone was preparing to manipulate fleet movements, perhaps endanger entire missions. Each revelation made her pulse quicken. She felt the weight of responsibility press against her chest. The room wasn't just a chamber, it was a puzzle of human behavior, alliances, and duplicity. And she had to solve it before the pieces crushed her. The moment stretched, fragile, dangerous. Lyra ducked low, rolling under the nearest bodyguard's swing. Her movements were precise, economical, almost invisible, honed from years of anticipation. She flipped him onto his back with a silent twist, feeling the satisfaction of control as officers' jaws dropped. Another guard lunged, but she sidestepped, grabbing his wrist and twisting him into the floor with a quiet crack. The dance of survival unfolded with cinematic clarity. Sweat beaded her brow, the taste of blood and adrenaline mixed in her mouth. Officers who had mocked or doubted her now faced the consequences of underestimating her. And all the while, her eyes never left the observation window. Kalen Voss remained motionless, unreadable, yet somehow guiding her without a word. The unseen chessboard had shifted. Then came the revelation that tightened the knot in her stomach. A secured terminal flickered with unauthorized access. The fleet's mission logs had been tampered with moments before the confrontation. Someone had exploited Rourke's personal vendetta against her to infiltrate sensitive operations. It was audacious. It was terrifying. And it proved her suspicion. She was not just a target of anger, she was a target of strategy. Lyra's heart pounded in rhythm with the threat. She felt the enormity of the storm brewing beyond the walls. Every officer, every bodyguard, every glance could conceal intent. She clenched her jaw, readying herself for the next move. The game had escalated beyond fists and fear. The survival of the fleet, her own credibility, and perhaps countless lives now depended on her next decision. And the chapter ended with her poised, every muscle tense, eyes burning toward Kalen, knowing the true battle was about to begin. The storm wasn't outside the fleet, it was inside her. Lyra's heartbeat hammered like war drums as the chamber's fluorescent lights flickered, echoing the tension. Every officer who hadn't immediately fled or joined Rourke's defense now watched her as if she were both threat and miracle. Lyra could feel their skepticism, their whispered calculations. She needed answers, not compliance. She needed leverage, not chaos. And the only person who could give her either was Kalen Voss, the man she had thought lost, now a silent sentinel at the edge of the glass. Her pulse quickened not with fear but recognition. Survival, strategy, and truth were converging in this moment. One wrong move and she could become a pawn. One right move and she could expose decades of corruption. Lyra inhaled, steadying herself, preparing to navigate the web of betrayal. The guards she had bested weren't finished. Two charged simultaneously, adrenaline fueling their strikes. Lyra twisted midair, catching one's arm, using his momentum to slam him into the railing. The other swung blindly, missing by inches, his gasp loud in the charged air. Every movement was calculated, every motion rehearsed, yet it carried the raw emotion of someone who had endured years of subtle attacks and silenced injustices. Lyra's mind wasn't just on defense, It was on uncovering the network around her. Who had manipulated Rourke? Who had compromised the fleet? Every suppressed whisper, every glance, every hesitation now mattered. She was no longer reacting, she was hunting. Amid the chaos, Lyra's eyes caught the first flicker of surveillance footage on a corner screen. Unauthorized access to critical missions. Someone was leaking operational plans. Someone had known exactly how to engineer the perfect distraction. The realization sank deep. Rourke's punch had been bait, but the bigger threat was invisible, strategic, and lethal. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility press like lead on her shoulders. Her training kicked in: assess, prioritize, neutralize. She moved with precise steps to secure the terminal, inputting override codes she had memorized long ago. Every second mattered. Every gesture could either expose her or protect her. The storm of betrayal was no longer abstract. It was real, present, and demanding action. Then, through the chaos, Kalen's hand pressed against the glass. His signal was subtle, a flicker of fingers, a slight tilt of his head, but Lyra understood instantly. Someone else was involved. Someone closer than she realized. A silent alliance, hidden behind ranks, uniforms, and trust, was orchestrating events to devastate the fleet from within. Her blood ran hot with a mix of fear and determination. Lyra clenched her jaw, her hands steady despite the sting of blood and sweat. She would not allow this to continue. Not now. Not ever. The chapter closed with Lyra staring directly at Kalen, her mind calculating the next move, the first step toward exposing the conspiracy before it consumed everyone she cared about, and before Rourke, once unconscious and defeated, could awaken to reclaim his fury. The chamber's lights flickered again, but this time it wasn't a glitch, it was the warning she had been waiting for. Lyra sensed the shift immediately. Shadows moved where none should have been. Officers she had counted as neutral were subtly repositioning, their hands brushing the holsters she hadn't seen before. The air grew thick, like static before a storm, and Lyra knew instinctively, the real threat was closer than she imagined. Kalen Voss's eyes locked with hers, sharp and calculating behind the glass. He didn't move, but he communicated everything she needed to know. Trust no one. Protect the information. Act decisively. The past had returned to test her again, but this time the battlefield was the command chamber itself, and the prize was far higher than pride. It was survival, honor, and truth. A subtle sound drew her attention, the hiss of hydraulic lifts activating outside the observation window. Lyra's mind raced. Reinforcements? Extraction teams? Or worse, assassins disguised as security? Every possibility demanded action. She ducked behind a console, her bloodied lips stinging as her chest heaved. Her hands moved over controls, pulling up layouts of the chamber, scanning exits, vents, and blind spots. Every officer who had mocked or feared her earlier now seemed like a potential threat. The adrenaline surged not just to fight but to survive strategically. Each heartbeat counted, each decision held life or death weight. The room was no longer a briefing chamber, it was a gauntlet, testing every lesson she had ever learned, every instinct she had honed under Kalen's past mentorship. Then a whisper, barely audible, cut across the tension. Commander Kalis. It was low, deliberate. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. From the corner, Lieutenant Kresh emerged, hands raised but eyes glinting with calculation. He had been one of her allies once, or at least she thought he was. Now, doubt settled like frost in her stomach. Was he trying to negotiate? Or betray? She had learned long ago that fear could mask ambition, and ambition could mask treachery. Lyra's body moved almost on its own, muscles coiling for defensive strikes, ready to subdue without hesitation. But she hesitated just enough to catch a faint movement in Kresh's pocket, a flash drive. The revelation was instant: he had been feeding Rourke, or someone far higher, with classified mission data. Her mind snapped into clarity. The web of betrayal had threads closer to her than she had realized. The tension erupted when Kalen pressed his hand to the glass again, signaling urgency. Lyra realized that escape alone wouldn't save her. The chamber, the officers, even the fallen admiral were all part of a game she hadn't yet fully seen. But now she had the pieces to act. Rourke neutralized, bodyguards disoriented, Kresh exposed, Kalen watching, and a strategy forming in her mind. Every second mattered. Her pulse synced with the hum of machinery, her vision sharp with calculation. She would expose the conspiracy, reclaim control, and survive. The chapter ended with her springing into action, moving toward Kresh, eyes burning with resolve, knowing that one wrong move could cost her everything, but one correct strike could change the entire course of the Northern Fleet forever. Lyra's boots scraped across the steel floor, the sound swallowed by tension yet echoing in her ears. Kresh froze mid-step, eyes widening as he realized she had seen everything. The flash drive gleamed faintly in his hand, evidence of his betrayal, and Lyra knew she had to act fast. Her body moved with precision, every muscle coiled yet controlled. One misstep and the entire operation, the fleet, her life, the truth, could collapse. The officers around them flinched, unsure whether to intervene or remain paralyzed by fear. Kalen's figure on the observation window was motionless, but his presence anchored her, a silent reminder of missions past where trust and timing had meant the difference between life and death. Lyra reached Kresh before he could react, twisting the flash drive from his grip with a sharp movement honed from years of training. The moment Kresh's betrayal was exposed, a ripple of shock raced through the room. Some officers gasped audibly, others stared, frozen in disbelief, unable to reconcile the man they had trusted with the traitor before them. Rourke groaned from the floor, stirring as if sensing his loss of control. Lyra didn't flinch. She was a storm contained, a combination of intellect, discipline, and unbroken resolve. She pressed her advantage, keeping Kresh cornered, her voice low, commanding, lethal. "Who sent you? Who's behind this?" The question wasn't just about loyalty, it was a probe into the heart of the conspiracy threatening everything she had built. Kresh stammered, sweat beading, eyes darting as Lyra's gaze pinned him like a predator's. Suddenly, a secure channel beeped on the terminal she had overridden. The monitor displayed an unknown location, a covert communications hub sending directives to Rourke, Kresh, and hidden operatives across the fleet. Lyra's stomach tightened. The conspiracy stretched far beyond the chamber walls, a network of manipulation, greed, and silent control. Her mind raced, connecting dots from months of observation, suspicious logs, and subtle betrayals. Kalen's presence became more urgent, his eyes flicking to the terminal, urging her to act with speed and precision. She realized that the punch, the distraction, and the infiltration were all threads in a web intended to topple the Northern Fleet from the inside. She had uncovered the tip of an iceberg. Then came the hardest choice. The chamber was packed, the stakes immediate. Act decisively now, neutralize Rourke's influence and Kresh's complicity, or risk losing everything to chaos. Lyra's pulse surged. She positioned herself between the two, commanding authority not through rank but presence. Her voice cut through the panic. "This stops now." Officers who had cowered or whispered scrambled for clarity, uncertain how to act without crossing the line. She secured the flash drive, activated the override on communications, and prepared for Rourke to rise. Every instinct screamed that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The chapter ends with Lyra standing tall, bloodied but unbroken, eyes fixed on Rourke, every nerve taut, ready for the storm that would determine the fate of the fleet. Rourke's groan turned into a growl as he struggled to push himself up from the cold steel floor. His bodyguards hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear, unsure whether to follow the admiral who had been humiliated or the officer now controlling the room. Lyra's stance was unyielding, blood dripping from her split lip, her fists still clenched with the energy of years of defiance. Kalen Voss's presence on the observation window was a steady, silent pulse of reassurance. He was watching her, measuring her resolve. Every officer in the room sensed the shift. The tide had turned. Authority was no longer measured by rank or title. It was measured by courage, by clarity, by action. Lyra knew that she had to maintain momentum or risk losing the advantage she had fought tooth and nail to gain. With a sudden, precise motion, she advanced toward Rourke, eyes locked on his every twitch. The room seemed to shrink around her as she forced him to the ground, one calculated step at a time. The bodyguards tried to intervene, but she was faster, smarter, and fueled by more than just adrenaline. It was the cumulative fire of every insult, every manipulation, every hidden betrayal she had endured. Her movements were a storm contained within a human body, each strike and step measured, deliberate. Officers who had mocked her moments earlier now whispered in awe, some instinctively drawing back, others frozen in disbelief. Lyra's presence was a declaration. She would not yield and she would not be silenced. The flash drive she had taken from Kresh now lay safely in her pocket, a key to exposing the hidden network undermining the fleet. Lyra activated the override protocol she had memorized, sending encrypted messages to trusted officers across the fleet. Every second mattered. If the conspiracy spread before she could secure the communications, lives could be lost, missions sabotaged, and entire operations derailed. Her mind worked with terrifying speed, assessing threats, calculating contingencies, and anticipating reactions. Kalen's signal from the observation window urged her to maintain focus, reminding her that the storm outside this chamber was only the beginning. Every move she made had repercussions far beyond the walls of the briefing room. Then, almost imperceptibly, a shift occurred. Crush's resistance crumbled, his eyes wide with realization and fear. He knew he had been cornered not just physically but strategically. Lyra's voice cut through the room, steady, unwavering. "You will tell the truth. Every lie, every hidden order, every secret you carried will be exposed." The officers around them now watched as the unthinkable unfolded. Authority stripped bare, consequences enforced by skill and moral clarity rather than title. Rourke, still groggy, realized he had lost control, not just of Lyra but of the situation entirely. The chapter closes as Lyra takes a breath, blood and sweat mingling on her face, eyes blazing toward Kalen, understanding that the next moves would determine not just victory, but justice for the fleet and the legacy she had fought to protect. Rourke's groan escalated into a roar as he finally regained some of his strength. His bodyguards lunged as one, a coordinated strike born from training and loyalty, but Lyra was already ahead of them. Every movement, every step, every strike was calculated with surgical precision. She had anticipated this. Years of covert operations, survival drills, and battles under Kalen Voss' guidance coalesced into a perfect moment of execution. She pivoted, sweeping a guard's legs while twisting another into the steel railing. The officers who had stood paralyzed now witnessed the impossible. A single commander moving with the force and clarity of an entire strike team. The chamber became a blur of motion and control. Lyra was both storm and eye of the storm, unstoppable yet precise, her focus absolute. Kalen's reflection on the observation window was steady, his eyes communicating a silent countdown. Lyra moved toward Rourke, her presence a physical embodiment of defiance, justice, and unbroken will. The Admiral staggered, fists raised, pride and fury colliding in a dangerous mix. Lyra struck, not recklessly, but with the combined weight of strategy, emotion, and years of pent-up restraint. Rourke crashed to the floor again, this time subdued completely. The bodyguards froze mid-reach, realizing their leader's authority had crumbled, replaced by someone who commanded respect not through fear, but through undeniable skill and clarity of purpose. The room was silent, yet every eye burned with the intensity of what had just occurred. Then came Crush's confession, trembling yet complete. Under Lyra's command, he revealed the web of manipulation. Officers bribed, missions sabotaged, communications compromised. Each revelation tightened the grip on the room, forcing every observer to confront betrayal and accountability. The chamber was no longer a battlefield of fists but of truth, and Lyra's authority had transcended rank. She had transformed humiliation and danger into leverage, turning the conspiracy's own mechanisms against itself. Kalen's presence remained a guiding shadow, a reminder of the lessons learned in past missions. Trust sparingly, act decisively, and always anticipate the unseen. The Northern Fleet for a moment held its breath, witnessing history in motion. Finally, Lyra turned toward the observation window, locking eyes with Kalen. No words were needed. Together they understood the next steps: contain the conspiracy, secure the fleet, and ensure justice reached every corner of the operation. The adrenaline of the fight ebbed, replaced by resolve and clarity. Officers who had doubted her now stepped forward, inspired by the audacity and skill she had displayed. Rourke remained on the floor, defeated physically and morally, as the evidence of his misdeeds spread across the network. The chapter ended with Lyra standing tall, bloodied but unbroken, eyes blazing, hands trembling slightly from the effort, yet every nerve in her body attuned to the final tasks: justice, order, and the restoration of truth. The climax had arrived and she had emerged victorious, not just in combat but in principle. The command chamber had transformed. Where once chaos and betrayal had ruled, order now crept in, cautious but undeniable. Lyra Kalis stood at the center, chest rising and falling steadily, eyes scanning the room that had once been a battlefield. Officers who had feared her now approached with respect, some with hesitation, others with quiet admiration. Rourke was restrained, a fallen giant whose pride and influence had crumbled under the weight of truth. Lyra's pulse finally slowed, the storm inside her giving way to clarity. Every punch, every maneuver, every calculation had led to this. Justice delivered not through politics, but through courage, skill, and unwavering moral clarity. Kalen Voss remained at the observation window, nodding subtly, a silent acknowledgement that the past, present, and future had aligned in her favor. Crush, shaken and remorseful, provided full disclosure. The sabotage, the misinformation, the secret alliances, it all unraveled under Lyra's unwavering presence. Each revelation was like a chisel, carving away layers of deceit, exposing corruption, and restoring integrity to the Northern Fleet. Officers began to take action, securing sensitive information, checking mission logs, and reaffirming loyalty to truth rather than fear. Lyra guided them with calm authority, her voice clear, steady, and unshakable. No one dared challenge her. Not now, not after witnessing the precision, strategy, and emotional fortitude she had displayed. The room, once suffocating with tension, now hummed with purpose. The Admiral's influence had evaporated, replaced by a renewed commitment to honor and accountability. As she moved through the chamber, Lyra reflected on everything that had led her here. The punch, the betrayal, the years of preparation, the shadow of Kalen Voss. They were not just challenges but lessons, each shaping her into the officer capable of this moment. Her hand still bore the faint sting of blood from the fight, and her lip throbbed, a reminder of the personal cost of standing firm. Yet, in that pain she found satisfaction, proof that action, when guided by principle and skill, could alter destinies. The fleet had witnessed not just a display of combat prowess, but the embodiment of leadership, courage under fire, intelligence under pressure, and integrity in the face of systemic corruption. Finally, Lyra turned toward the observation window where Kalen's figure lingered. She allowed herself a rare, brief smile. The conspiracy had been exposed, Rourke defeated, and the Northern Fleet's integrity restored. Officers now moved with renewed focus, the chamber alive with coordinated energy rather than fear. Lyra knew this was more than victory, it was a statement. No one, no matter their rank or intimidation, could subvert justice when confronted with courage, skill, and unwavering moral resolve. The chapter ended with Lyra walking to the center of the room, bloodied but unbowed, ready to lead her fleet into a new era of accountability, trust, and honor, leaving behind a legacy that would never be forgotten.